In the fading twilight of Roman Britain, when the last legions had abandoned the island to face darkness alone, a figure emerged from the mists of history whose name would echo through the centuries. He was not born wearing a crown, nor did he wield his sword in glittering tournaments beneath silk pavilions. The man who would become the legendary King Arthur fought in the mud and blood of a dying world, leading desperate warriors against relentless invaders. Yet somehow, through the alchemy of time and storytelling, this shadowy warlord transformed into the greatest king of legend, the embodiment of chivalry and the eternal symbol of hope in Britain's darkest hours. His journey from historical obscurity to mythological immortality is a tale as compelling as any of his supposed adventures. The Britain that produced Arthur, if he existed at all, bore little resemblance to the gleaming Camelot of later imagination. When the Roman Empire withdrew its legions from Britain around 410, it left behind a power vacuum that would spawn generations of chaos. For nearly 4 centuries, Britain had been a Roman province, its people living under the protection of the most sophisticated military machine the world had ever known. Cities flourished behind defensive walls, roads connected distant territories, and Roman law provided order and structure to daily life. The Romano-British population had grown accustomed to this stability, adopting Latin, Christianity, and Roman ways of life, while maintaining elements of their Celtic heritage. But Rome's withdrawal was not a clean break or an organized departure. The empire itself was collapsing under the weight of its own vast territories and the pressure of barbarian invasions across Europe. Britain, situated on the empire's northwestern edge, was simply too remote and too expensive to defend when Rome itself faced existential threats. The legions left, and with them went the infrastructure of order. Without the military presence to maintain them, the sophisticated systems of governance, trade, and defense began to crumble. The Romano-British elite found themselves suddenly responsible for their own protection, their own administration, their own survival. What followed was a period so chaotic and so poorly documented that historians appropriately dubbed it the Dark Ages. The written record becomes fragmentary. Archaeological evidence grows scarce, and the detailed chronicles that marked the Roman period give way to silence. Into this documented void, both history and legend would rush to fill the emptiness with stories, some based on fading memories of real events, others pure invention. The Britain of the 5th and 6th centuries was a fractured landscape of competing kingdoms, shifting alliances, and constant warfare. Romano-British leaders struggled to maintain what they could of civilization while facing threats from multiple directions. The most significant threat came from across the North Sea. Germanic tribes, primarily the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, began arriving on Britain's eastern shores, initially perhaps as mercenaries hired by British leaders to help defend against other raiders. According to the monk Gildas, writing in the 6th century, this proved to be a catastrophic mistake. The hired warriors turned on their employers, sent for reinforcements from their homelands, and began a conquest that would eventually transform Britain into England, the land of the Angles. These were not organized military campaigns in the Roman sense, but rather waves of migration and settlement accompanied by violence, displacement, and cultural transformation. British strongholds fell one by one. Latin gave way to Germanic languages. Christianity retreated before pagan gods. The Romano-British population was killed, enslaved, or driven westward into what would become Wales and Cornwall. This was the desperate world that produced the need for a hero, for someone who could stand against the tide of invasion and offer hope of survival. The historical evidence for Arthur is frustratingly thin. requiring us to piece together fragments from sources written centuries after the supposed events. The earliest reference that might relate to Arthur comes from a poem called Wygodadin, probably composed around 600, which mentions a warrior who nevertheless was not Arthur, suggesting Arthur's name was already synonymous with exceptional martial prowess. But Wygodadin does not tell us anything concrete about Arthur himself. The first substantial mention appears in the Historia Brittonum, attributed to the Welsh monk Nennius, and compiled around 828. This text lists 12 battles fought by Arthur against the Saxons, culminating in the Battle of Mount Badon, where Arthur supposedly killed 960 men in a single charge. The Historia calls Arthur not a king, but a dux bellorum, a leader of battles, and a miles, a soldier. This suggests a military commander rather than a monarch, someone who led combined forces from multiple British kingdoms against the common Saxon threat. The battles are listed, but their locations remain disputed, with scholars placing them everywhere from southern England to Scotland. The Battle of Mount Badon itself holds a unique position in the historical record because it is mentioned by Gildas in his De Excedio et Conquestu Britanniae, written around 540. Gildas describes Badon as a decisive British victory that brought a generation of peace, dating it to around the year 500. However, and this is crucial, Gildas never mentions Arthur by name. He credits the British resistance to a leader named Ambrosius Aurelianus, describing him as of Roman descent and noble character. This silence has puzzled historians for centuries. If Arthur achieved such a decisive victory, why would Gildas, writing within living memory of the event, fail to mention him? Later medieval sources explained this by claiming Gildas deliberately deleted Arthur from his account because Arthur had killed Gildas's brother. Modern historians have proposed various explanations for the evidence. Some suggest Arthur was a real military leader, whose achievements were later attributed to him from various sources, creating a composite figure from multiple historical persons. Others propose he might have been a subordinate of Ambrosius Aurelianus, who gained fame through his tactical innovations. The theory that Arthur introduced cavalry tactics to British warfare has proven popular, imagining him as a Romano-British commander who used mounted warriors, drawing on Roman military traditions, to devastating effect against Saxon infantry. The Saxons fought primarily on foot, and a disciplined cavalry force could break their formations and turn tactical situations decisively. Several historical candidates have been proposed as the real Arthur. One is Riothamus, a British king who led an army to Gaul around 470 to fight alongside the last Roman forces against the Visigoths. His name means Supreme King, and his campaign across the sea to fight in Gaul matches elements of later Arthurian legend. Another candidate is Arthur mac Aidan, an Irish prince of Dalriata in what is now Scotland, who led military campaigns in the late 6th century. Others have suggested Arthur might have been a title rather than a name, perhaps a Roman military position that survived into post-Roman Britain. The Latin name Artorius was used by Roman officers, and a 2nd century commander named Lucius Artorius Castus led Sarmatian cavalry units stationed in Britain, leading to speculation about connections to the Arthurian legend. What we can say with reasonable certainty is that around the year 500, the Saxons suffered a major defeat at a place called Badon, which halted their advance for a generation. Whether a man named Arthur led the victorious British forces remains unproven, and perhaps unprovable. The scarcity of contemporary sources, the silence of Gildas, and the gap of 3 centuries between the supposed events and the first clear references to Arthur by name all work against historical certainty. Most modern academic historians conclude that if Arthur existed, he was likely a military leader of some significance, but the Arthur of legend is largely a literary creation. Yet the very persistence of his name, appearing repeatedly in Welsh sources from the 9th century onward, suggests some historical kernel might underlie the elaborate mythology. The transformation of Arthur from a possible historical warlord into the legendary king of medieval romance began in earnest with Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britanniae, completed around 1136. This work proved to be one of the most influential books of the Middle Ages. Despite being almost entirely fictional, Geoffrey, a Welsh cleric working in Oxford, claimed to be translating an ancient British book brought from Brittany, but modern scholars agree he largely invented his narrative, drawing on Welsh traditions, earlier chronicles, and his own considerable imagination. Geoffrey's Historia provided Britain with a grand, pseudo-historical narrative, tracing the island's rulers from the legendary Trojan prince Brutus through to the 7th century Anglo-Saxon period. Arthur occupies the centerpiece of Geoffrey's work, and virtually all the iconic elements of the Arthurian legend make their first clear appearance in these pages. Geoffrey introduced Arthur's father, Uther Pendragon, whose very name evokes both majesty and mystery. The story of Arthur's conception at Tintagel Castle, where Uther magically disguised himself as the Duke of Cornwall to sleep with the Duke's wife Igraine, sets the stage for Arthur's extraordinary destiny. Geoffrey gave us Merlin not merely as a prophet, but as an active participant in Arthur's story, using magic to facilitate Uther's deception and presumably guiding the young Arthur's path to kingship.
The sword Excalibur appears in Geoffrey's account, though he calls it Caliburnus,
derived from the Welsh name Caladfolc.
Geoffrey describes it as forged on the mystical island of Avalon, giving the weapon a supernatural origin that later writers would elaborate upon extensively. In Geoffrey's telling, Arthur is not simply a war leader, but a king who unites Britain, defeats the Saxons decisively, and then embarks on an ambitious campaign of conquest across Europe. Geoffrey's Arthur subdues Ireland, Iceland, Norway, and Gaul, eventually marching on Rome itself to claim the imperial crown. This grandiose vision transformed Arthur from a defender of Britain into a world-conquering emperor, a Celtic Alexander the Great. Geoffrey also introduced the treachery of Mordred, Arthur's nephew or son, who seizes the throne, and Guinevere while Arthur campaigns abroad. The final battle at Camlann, where Arthur and Mordred mortally wound each other, appears here for the first time in detail. Geoffrey describes Arthur's mysterious transportation to Avalon for the healing of his wounds, creating the enduring image of Arthur as the once and future king who will return when Britain needs him most. The ambiguity of Arthur's fate proves crucial to his legend. He does not die in any conventional sense. Instead, he departs to a mystical realm, wounded but potentially recoverable, eternally poised to return. Geoffrey's work was not universally accepted even in his own time. Fellow chroniclers like William of Newburgh denounced it as fabrication, and Gerald of Wales reported that demons would flee when the Gospel of John was placed on a possessed man, but would return if Geoffrey's Historia was substituted. Nevertheless, the book proved phenomenally popular, surviving in over 200 medieval manuscripts. It was quickly translated from Latin into vernacular languages, first into Norman French by the poet Wace around 1155, who added the detail of the Round Table, and then into Middle English by Layman in the early 13th century. Each retelling added new elements while Geoffrey's basic framework remained recognizable. Geoffrey's Merlin deserves special attention as he represents one of Geoffrey's most original creations, though drawing on Welsh traditions of prophetic figures. In the Historia, Merlin appears primarily in connection with Uther Pendragon rather than Arthur himself.
Geoffrey presented Merlin's prophecies in deliberately obscure language that medieval readers interpreted as predictions about their own times. These prophecies were excerpted and circulated separately from the Historia, influencing political thought throughout the Middle Ages. Later writers would transform Merlin into the wise mentor figure, the wizard who guides Arthur's education and remains his counselor. But this development came after Geoffrey. The legendary Arthur, found in Geoffrey's work, reflects 12th century Norman political aspirations as much as any 5th century reality. Geoffrey was writing for Norman patrons who had conquered England in 1066 and sought historical validation for their rule. And Arthur, who united Britain and conquered much of Europe, provided a prestigious precedent for Norman kings who also ruled territories on both sides of the English Channel. The Historia offered the Norman elite a glorious British past they could claim as their own, positioning them as heirs to Arthur's legacy rather than as foreign conquerors. This political function helps explain the work's immediate popularity among the Norman aristocracy and its rapid spread throughout medieval Europe. The Arthurian legend underwent another crucial transformation in 12th and 13th century France, where writers fundamentally reimagined the stories as courtly romances rather than chronicles of warfare and conquest. The French writer Chrétien de Troyes, working in the latter half of the 12th century, proved particularly influential in reshaping the legend. Chrétien wrote 5 Arthurian romances that shifted focus from Arthur himself to the adventures of individual knights, particularly Lancelot. In doing so, he introduced themes of courtly love, personal honor, and spiritual quest that would permanently alter the nature of Arthurian literature. Chrétien's innovation was to make Arthur's court at Camelot the starting point for adventures, rather than the location of the main action. Knights would depart from Arthur's court, undergo trials and quests that tested their character, and return transformed by their experiences. This structure allowed writers to explore themes of individual identity, moral choice, and the tension between worldly glory and spiritual virtue. Arthur himself often became a somewhat passive figure in these tales, providing authority and judgment, but not driving the narrative forward. Most significantly, Chrétien introduced the character of Lancelot and his adulterous love for Queen Guinevere in his romance Le Chevalier de la Charette. His forbidden passion, conducted within the heart of Arthur's court, created dramatic tension and moral complexity absent from earlier versions of the legend. Lancelot represented the perfect knight in terms of martial prowess and courtly behavior, yet his love for his lord's wife placed him in an impossible position. Later writers would develop this love triangle extensively, making it central to Camelot's eventual downfall. The adultery of Lancelot and Guinevere embodies the fundamental contradiction at the heart of courtly love literature, where the ideals of service and devotion clash with the realities of feudal loyalty and Christian morality. Chrétien also introduced the Holy Grail into Arthurian legend through his unfinished romance, Le Conte du Grail. In Chrétien's version, the Grail is a mysterious serving dish seen during a procession at the castle of the wounded Fisher King. Chrétien died before finishing the poem, leaving the Grail's significance unexplained and inspiring numerous continuations by other writers. Later authors, particularly Robert de Boron, transformed the Grail into the cup used by Christ at the Last Supper, adding profound Christian symbolism to the Arthurian corpus. The quest for the Grail became a spiritual journey requiring purity of heart and deed, achievable only by the sinless knight, Galahad. The French Vulgate cycle, compiled in the early 13th century, created an extensive prose narrative covering the entire scope of Arthurian history, from the Grail's origins through Arthur's death.
These massive compilations integrated material from Geoffrey of Monmouth, Chrétien de Troyes, and numerous other sources into a comprehensive saga. The Vulgate introduced Galahad as Lancelot's son, the perfect knight who succeeds in the Grail quest, where his flawed father cannot. This addition created a genealogy of virtue, suggesting that even the sins of noble men like Lancelot could be redeemed through their descendants. The French romances also developed the character of Morgan Le Fay, Arthur's half-sister, transforming her from a healing fairy into a malevolent enchantress whose schemes threaten Camelot from within. These French developments reflected the concerns of medieval aristocratic society, particularly the tension between earthly glory and spiritual salvation. The Knights of the Round Table struggled to reconcile their duties as warriors and lovers with the demands of Christian morality. The Grail quest becomes a winnowing process that reveals the spiritual worthiness or unworthiness of each knight. Most fail not through lack of courage, but through sin, whether pride, lust, or violence. Only 3 knights, Galahad, Percival, and Bors, achieve the Grail, and of these, only Bors returns to Arthur's court. The others die or withdraw from the world, suggesting that ultimate spiritual achievement is incompatible with courtly life. The French romances also transformed the geography of Arthur's world. Camelot became less a specific fortress and more a symbolic location representing an ideal court. The adventures of Arthur's knights took them through an enchanted landscape of mysterious castles, perilous forests, and magical islands, where the boundaries between the mundane and supernatural constantly blurred. This fantastical geography reflected medieval literary conventions, but also served symbolic purposes, as the landscape itself tested and revealed the character of those who traversed it. All these developments from French Romance tradition, the courtly love themes, the Grail quest, the Round Table Fellowship, coalesced in the late 15th century in Sir Thomas Malory's Le Morte Arthur, which became the definitive English version of the Arthurian legend. Malory, writing in Middle English around 1470, while apparently imprisoned during the Wars of the Roses, compiled, rearranged, and adapted French and English Arthurian sources into a coherent narrative arc, tracing Arthur's entire story from conception to death. Published by William Caxton in 1485, Le Morte d'Arthur shaped all subsequent English-language Arthurian literature. Malory's genius lay in his synthesis and his emotional directness. Where the French romances often luxuriated in elaborate description and digression, Malory wrote in a more straightforward, vigorous prose that emphasized action and dialogue. His work is divided into 8 books covering different aspects of Arthur's reign, from his rise to power through the adventures of individual knights to the tragic dissolution of the Round Table Fellowship. Malory retained the grand scope of the French Vulgate, while making the narrative more accessible to English readers, occasionally updating anachronistic elements. He famously replaced the Saxon invaders of earlier versions with Ottoman Turks, reflecting the contemporary 15th century threat of Turkish expansion into Europe. The structure of Le Morte d'Arthur follows a tragic arc. The early books establish Arthur's kingdom and the Fellowship of the Round Table as humanity's highest achievement, a golden age where justice prevails and noble knights uphold their sacred oaths. The middle sections follow various knights on quests that test and display their virtues and vices. But the final books chronicle the irreversible destruction of everything Arthur built, brought down by the very people who made it great. Malory does not present this destruction as resulting from external enemies, but from internal contradictions and human weakness. Malory developed the Lancelot and Guinevere relationship with particular poignancy, showing how their love, genuine and deep, ultimately destroys the fellowship they both cherish. Lancelot is portrayed as the greatest of all earthly knights, unmatched in combat and devoted to the service of others. But his adultery with Guinevere taints his virtue and makes him unworthy of achieving the Grail quest. When Mordred and Agravain expose the affair, they force Arthur to act against his own wife and his best knight, even though Arthur himself has long known of their love and chosen to overlook it. The subsequent conflict tears the Round Table apart as knights must choose between their loyalty to Lancelot and their duty to Arthur. Malory presents the downfall of Camelot as a tragedy of conflicting loyalties rather than simple villainy. Gawain, Arthur's nephew and initially a friend of Lancelot, becomes consumed by vengeance after Lancelot inadvertently kills Gawain's brothers during Guinevere's rescue from execution. Gawain's refusal to accept reconciliation drives Arthur to continue a war that serves no good purpose. While Arthur fights Lancelot in France, Mordred seizes the throne in Britain, forcing Arthur to return to face his son in the final battle at Camlann. The battle is joined almost accidentally when a knight draws his sword to kill an adder, a gesture misinterpreted as treachery by both sides. The resulting slaughter leaves virtually all the knights of the Round Table dead, and Arthur mortally wounded. In Malory's famous conclusion, the dying Arthur commands Sir Bedivere to throw Excalibur into a nearby lake. Bedivere initially resists, reluctant to discard such a magnificent weapon, but eventually obeys. A hand emerges from the water to catch the sword and draw it beneath the surface, returning Excalibur to the mystical realm from which it came. Arthur is then taken away on a barge by mysterious women, presumably to Avalon, where he might be healed. The inscription on the tomb found later reads, "Here lies Arthur, the once and future king," preserving the possibility of his return. Guinevere enters a convent and Lancelot becomes a monk, both spending their final years in penance for the love that destroyed so much. Malory ends with a nostalgic lament for the passing of the age of chivalry, when great knights upheld noble ideals, even as human weakness ensured those ideals could not endure. Malory's work resonated particularly strongly with English readers because it arrived at a pivotal moment in English history. The Wars of the Roses had shown the devastation that civil conflict among the nobility could cause. The Tudor dynasty that emerged from this chaos actively promoted Arthurian associations, with Henry VII naming his eldest son Arthur to invoke the legendary king's prestige. When that Arthur died young, his brother succeeded as Henry VIII, but the Arthurian symbolism remained important to Tudor propaganda, presenting the dynasty as fulfilling the prophecy of Arthur's return to restore Britain's glory. The legendary elements that Geoffrey, the French romancers, and Malory wove into the Arthurian story carried symbolic weight that transcended their narrative function. Excalibur, the magical sword, represented legitimate authority and divine sanction. In some versions, Arthur proves his right to rule by pulling a sword from a stone, demonstrating that only he can wield kingship. In other versions, the Lady of the Lake gives Arthur Excalibur after he has already become king, symbolizing the mystical foundation of his power. The sword's return to the lake at Arthur's death suggests that his unique authority dies with him and cannot be claimed by any successor. The act of throwing away such a powerful weapon represents renunciation of earthly power in favor of spiritual transcendence. The Round Table symbolized an ideal of equality and fellowship among Arthur's knights. Unlike a rectangular table with a head position, the Round Table has no hierarchical seating. All knights who sit at it are theoretically equal, bound by the same oaths of honor and service. This represented a utopian vision of aristocratic society where merit rather than birth determined worth.
though the actual operation of the Round Table in the stories rarely achieved this ideal. The table was said to seat 150 knights, though the number varies in different sources. The Siege Perilous, a seat that would kill any unworthy knight who attempted to sit in it, remained empty until Galahad arrived, representing the messianic figure who would achieve what others could not.
Camelot itself functioned less as a specific location than as a symbolic space representing civilized order and courtly virtue. Malory identified Camelot with Winchester, Geoffrey placed Arthur's court at various locations, and other writers suggested different sites. The historical Arthur, if he existed, almost certainly never had a fixed capital in the medieval sense, but moved between strongholds as military necessity required. But Camelot as symbol represents humanity's aspiration toward justice, beauty, and community. Its inevitable fall reminds readers that all earthly achievements are temporary, no matter how glorious. The collapse of Camelot is not primarily a military defeat, but a moral and spiritual failure, as the Fellowship of the Round Table destroys itself through pride, lust, and inability to maintain the high standards it proclaimed. Avalon, the mystical island to which Arthur is taken for healing, represents a realm beyond ordinary reality where normal rules do not apply. Drawing on Celtic traditions of otherworldly islands inhabited by immortal beings, Avalon exists outside time, a place where wounds might be healed and death might be delayed or reversed. Arthur's removal to Avalon, rather than his definitive death, allows the legend to remain perpetually open-ended. He might return when Britain needs him most, an expectation that various historical moments have invoked. The ambiguity serves both narrative and political purposes, allowing each generation to imagine Arthur returning to address their particular concerns. The transformation of Arthur from possible historical warlord to legendary medieval king reflects the changing needs and aspirations of successive ages. The 5th century military leader, if he existed, would have fought in a desperate rearguard action to preserve Romano-British civilization against Germanic invaders. His tactics, equipment, and worldview would have been Roman or post-Roman rather than medieval. The Historia Brittonum's description of Arthur as Dux Bellorum suggests a professional soldier who commanded combined forces from multiple British kingdoms, possibly holding a revived Roman military title. Such a figure would have been concerned with tactical success, territorial defense, and the preservation of Christianity and literacy in Britain, not with courtly love or the quest for the Holy Grail. Geoffrey of Monmouth transformed this martial figure into a conquering monarch in the 12th century Norman mold, a king who not only defended his own territory, but extended his rule across the known world. Geoffrey's Arthur is an aggressive and empire builder whose ambitions mirror those of medieval kings seeking to expand their domains. This transformation served the political needs of Norman England, providing historical precedent for their own continental possessions and imperial aspirations. The addition of Merlin, Excalibur, and the magical elements added mythic weight to this newly elevated figure, suggesting that Arthur's power had supernatural sanction. The French romancers of the 12th and 13th centuries transformed Arthur again, making him the embodiment of courtly ideals. Arthur's court became the standard against which all other courts were measured, the place where the ideals of chivalry were perfectly expressed, at least initially. This Arthur presided over a fellowship of knights who represented different aspects of knightly virtue, from Lancelot's prowess and courtesy to Gawain's loyalty to Galahad's purity. The emphasis shifted from military conquest to personal virtue, from physical courage to spiritual worthiness. The addition of the Grail quest introduced explicitly Christian themes, making Arthur's court a way station in humanity's journey toward salvation. Malory synthesized these various visions into a comprehensive narrative that emphasized the tragic gap between human aspiration and human achievement. His Arthur establishes a kingdom based on justice and mutual fellowship, but human weakness ensures it cannot last. The very virtues that make Arthur's knights great also contain the seeds of destruction. Lancelot's dedication to Guinevere makes him the perfect courtly lover, but also an adulterer who betrays his king. Gawain's loyalty to his family drives him to pursue vengeance that destroys the peace. Arthur's own nobility prevents him from acting against Lancelot until forced to do so by public exposure of the affair. Malory's vision acknowledges that the ideals of chivalry are beautiful but ultimately unrealizable in a fallen world, making their failure both inevitable and tragic. Each transformation of Arthur responded to the needs and concerns of its own era. Medieval writers created the Arthur their audiences needed, whether as political figurehead, military exemplar, courtly ideal, or spiritual symbol. This adaptability explains the legend's persistence across centuries and cultures. Arthur can be reimagined to embody whatever virtues a particular age values most highly, because the historical foundation is so slight that almost any elaboration becomes possible. The shadowy 5th century warlord left enough evidence to suggest his existence, but not enough to constrain later interpretation. Modern writers have continued this process of transformation, creating Arthurian versions for their own times. Victorian authors like Alfred Lord Tennyson reimagined Arthur as a figure of moral earnestness and religious devotion, while 20th century writers like T.H. White and Mary Stuart explored psychological complexity and political realism. Contemporary Arthurian works range from historical fiction attempting to reconstruct a plausible Dark Age context to fantasy that embraces the magical elements fully. Each generation finds in Arthur what it seeks, whether historical truth, moral exemplar, tragic hero, or inspirational legend. The enduring power of the Arthurian legend lies in its combination of historical possibility with mythic resonance. Unlike purely fictional heroes, Arthur might have existed, giving his story a connection to actual events and places. Unlike fully historical figures whose lives are documented in detail, Arthur remains mysterious enough to be reimagined freely. The basic narrative arc, from obscure origins through glorious achievement to tragic downfall, provides a universal story pattern that speaks to fundamental human experiences of aspiration, accomplishment, and loss. The concept of Arthur as the once and future king proves particularly potent, transforming his story from historical narrative into perpetual possibility. Various historical moments have seen invocations of Arthur's expected return, from medieval Welsh resistance to English conquest through to modern British national identity. The idea that Arthur sleeps beneath a hill or in Avalon, ready to wake when Britain faces its darkest hour, transforms defeat into hope. The king may have failed in the past, but his failure is not final. History might repeat, but this time the outcome could be different. This aspect of the legend also explains why Arthur's court is typically presented at its moment of achievement just before its fall. Most Arthurian tales are set during the period when the Round Table Fellowship is complete, when justice prevails and noble deeds are celebrated, even though both readers and characters know disaster approaches. There is poignancy in this doomed golden age, this moment of perfect achievement that cannot last. The fall of Camelot becomes not just Arthur's tragedy, but humanity's tragedy. The recognition that our highest achievements contain the seeds of their own destruction, and that innocence once lost cannot be recovered. Arthur's story also explores the tension between individual desire and social duty, particularly through the Lancelot and Guinevere narrative. Their love is genuine and deep, but it conflicts with their obligations to Arthur and to the kingdom. The tragedy is not that they are villains, but that they are good people, trapped by circumstances and choices that make their love destructive. The question of whether they should have suppressed their feelings entirely or whether Arthur should have acted differently haunts the narrative, suggesting that some situations offer no good solutions, only choices between different kinds of harm. The legend persists because it addresses permanent features of human experience, rather than merely reflecting the concerns of a particular historical moment. The conflict between idealism and reality, the gap between human aspiration and human achievement, the tension between personal desire and social duty, the recognition that great accomplishments are temporary and vulnerable. These themes transcend their medieval expression to speak to contemporary audiences. Arthur's story reminds us that failure does not negate the value of striving for noble goals, that beauty and meaning can exist even in tragedy, and that hope can survive even comprehensive defeat. The very elusiveness of historical Arthur has become part of his appeal. Unlike heroes whose documented lives can be studied definitively, Arthur remains perpetually elusive, always just beyond the reach of historical certainty. This makes him available for reimagining in ways that thoroughly documented historical figures cannot be. We can project onto Arthur whatever virtues we value most highly precisely because we cannot pin down who he actually was. He becomes whatever each age needs him to be, adapting to changing values while maintaining his essential identity as Britain's greatest king. From the muddy battlefields of post-Roman Britain to the gleaming halls of Camelot, from the sparse mentions in early Welsh sources to the elaborate romances of medieval France, Arthur's journey mirrors humanity's need for heroes who embody our highest aspirations. Whether he ever existed as a flesh and blood warlord matters less than the fact that for 15 centuries, people have found in his story something worth preserving and retelling. The legend of Arthur Pendragon reminds us that even in humanity's darkest moments, even when civilization seems to be collapsing and chaos threatens to overwhelm order, individual courage and collective dedication to justice can make a difference, even if that difference proves temporary. And perhaps most importantly, his story suggests that failure, however comprehensive, need not be final. The once and future king sleeps, waiting for the moment when he will be needed again, and that possibility of return transforms defeat into enduring hope. If you enjoyed this deep exploration into the transformation of Arthur from historical warlord to legendary king, make sure to like this video and subscribe to History Scrolls for more fascinating journeys through mythology, legend, and the stories that have shaped human civilization across the centuries.